Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us here for another episode, whatever platform you're listening to us on, wherever in the world you're listening to us from. As always, thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you for the support. Thank you for sharing this podcast around. And today's topic in particular, I think, is one that all of us as coaches care about. And it's something that is on the forefront of my mind all the time, which is the betterment of my players as people and giving them the best opportunities they can to be successful, not just in basketball, but outside of basketball as well. And of course, with that, as all of you listening know, there are sometimes barriers that are in the way that keep our student athletes from having the experience that they should be having. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to dedicate this episode today specifically about removing barriers for student athletes. We'll talk about the barriers that exist. We'll talk about ways that those barriers can be removed. And if you as a coach who is listening are experiencing any of these particular barriers, hopefully this will give you some insight and maybe some ideas to kind of help you help your players out so that, again, they get the experience that they deserve being a student athlete. So really looking forward to getting into this one. To help discuss this topic with me, I have with me the head boys basketball coach at Veritas Christian Academy. He's also the co-founder of Higher Ed Hoops, so he's a busy man. My guest today is Coach Thomas Young. Coach, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Coach Hernandez, thanks for having me on. I'm doing well.
Good. Glad to hear it. Glad that things are going well. And like I said, really looking forward to getting your insight on this one, Coach, about these idea about removing barriers. It's such an important topic, and I'm sure, as you and I both know, the past couple of years have maybe added some more barriers than there used to be prior to COVID as well. So definitely a topical subject for sure. So let's go ahead and get started, Coach, with your basketball journey, your coaching journey. Where's the game taking you? Where is your coaching journey taking you? And what led you to the stops that you're at right now?
Yes, sir. Well, I've been really fortunate. I grew up in a small town, but we had a couple of coaches that were dedicated early on and got to play at a young age. And we actually participated in what used to be called YDOA, then AAU, and played in high school. I was fortunate to be pretty good in high school and had an opportunity to play in college. And so I played at a Division II school. At that time, it was Brevard College. They were transitioning into D2, and had an opportunity to just kind of see what that was about, and really enjoyed my experience as a player. But I really started looking at coaching at that point too. I wasn't the best player on the team. I really had to kind of earn my spot to even play at that level. But I really started to see the game from a different perspective. And so I knew that coaching was kind of going to be in the cards at some point. And I started coaching I didn't coach right after college. I kind of jumped around. I went into what's called AmeriCorps.
Yeah.
I worked for a program called College Forward, which allowed kids to gain access to higher education and then persist when they're there. So graduate with a bachelor's degree. And that program was really amazing. But that kind of helped lay the foundation for where I saw barriers for a lot of students and then also student athletes on all levels. And then I jumped into, I moved back to kind of where I was from after that, and got into coaching. And I've been coaching for about 6 years now. At a variety of different levels. I've been a head middle school boys coach, a head JV boys coach. I've coached obviously at the varsity level with Veritas Christian Academy. And then I've been a varsity assistant as well. And I also run a travel ball organization. So I'm pretty much always involved in basketball, but I've kind of been at every level, including coaching rec league sports. And I think all those different levels have provided a kind of wealth of knowledge to really see, the vast, I think maybe disparity, but even just the talent levels from each group and kind of how you have to coach each one. and kind of what each group faces in an effort to, grow as a player and as an individual. But that's kind of been my overall journey to where I'm at now. And I'm actually transitioning. I didn't get to update you, but I will actually be at Smoky Mountain High School.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it. I'd wanted to get back into teaching. I actually own my own business. So I own a baseball bat company.
Okay.
I made my family has made wooden baseball bats since 1993.
Oh, wow.
It's called Young Bat Company, and not to go too long into that, but that that opportunity allowed me to coach at some different areas, but I have my own business. And I decided I just missed teaching. I taught for 2 years when I was a JV coach, and then realized that I wanted to start, jump into the business with my dad, and just have that experience. He's 73 now, so I'm glad I did that to kind of strengthen our relationship. And but I miss teaching, and Smoky Mountain offered an opportunity to go there and coach and eventually take over the program from the current coach, who is actually a mentor of mine. He's won 2 state championships at the 2A level here in North Carolina. So I'm excited to learn from him and then eventually take over.
I am trying to mentally in my mind try and imagine how you do the schedule that you do, but I give you credit for that. How do you even balance all of those different things and prioritize everything? That's amazing.
It takes a lot. I mean, my wife is an amazing person and really understands. I think we all have a purpose in life, and I definitely believe that mine is working with youth, high school through elementary school, to be honest. And I thrive in that area. And I think I'm a better person when I'm able to work with those kids. And so she's really supportive of that. I'm pretty regimented. I get up at 3:30 every morning to go work out. I go to bed pretty early, but obviously during basketball season, those nights can get a little longer.
Yeah.
So get a little shorter. But I plan out as much as I can, and we just try to balance. I've got 3 kids, and one of them that will be in middle school this year. And so he loves to come with me, and my kids, both the younger of the 2, they also both like to come to basketball. And we try to make family events out of them. So when we go to travel tournaments, we try to, we go camping, or we try to make as much fun of it as we can. But it is a lot. I think for a lot of people, we like to stay busy.
Yeah, I can tell. No, that's awesome. Coach, you talked about prior to us recording here that you're something you're really passionate about is relationships, and you mentioned how relationships drive the game at all levels. Can you go a little bit further into that about what you mean by that, and just why you are so passionate about the relationship aspect of this coaching profession?
Yes, sir. I think you really have to get to know each player as a person. And I think we often forget that they're people. And that goes for all levels, especially when they're young. If you know that they like Star Wars, that might be the driving factor of why they come to a rec league practice, because you change something to where they feel like they're like literally some part of the drill or game, they feel like they're a part of. It's got some element of Star Wars. Like, that connection is part of that relationship. And I think that goes all the way up to when they're in high school and you're talking to players. And if you know about the player, the relationship becomes there's a deeper meaning to it, but also that kid feels valued. And I think they work harder for you. I think they're more willing to listen. And I think they're more willing to buy into everything that you're trying to do to help them. And I think that the one that's, I think, the most crucial, though, is when they're younger. I think we often take it for granted when the kid is playing rec league sports or middle school, and we don't realize that kid, you want them to love basketball, or whatever sport it may be. But for me, and for us, it's basketball, and I want them to love it so much that they're like, man, I want to get back on the court. But that doesn't mean that doing 1,000 layups in a row is the way to do that. But if I'm building a relationship with that kid and I can joke around with that kid and I understand maybe some of the things that are going on within their family or in their community, or even within their friend group, without getting too personal, it's just one of those things where when they feel comfortable to open up and you can find ways to talk to them, I think that it can really change their lives.
Yeah, that's it's interesting at the one of the aspects that you mentioned, like sometimes I think as a coach, we assume that our players come to practice or come to games because they really like basketball, they really enjoy basketball, but that's not always the case. Sometimes, you know, it's because of the coach that they have, right? And the fact that
Sure.
that coach is somebody they have a connection with, for for like the teamwork and the relationships they have with their teammates. And so yeah, I completely agree with you that, you know, you never know what might be that one thing that you know really connects you to a student and gives that student like that experience that like is transformative and like changes their life because like you took the time to like build that meaningful connection and build meaningful relationship to it. And it's pretty great what this coaching sport allows us to do and who it allows us to connect with, right?
Yeah, and I think the access it immediately gives you to a player, or a person is different than a lot of levels because the kids want to be there.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't always want to be at class. They don't always want to be at whatever function they're required to be at. But I mean, they're wanting to try out for your team. They're wanting to participate. And so they kind of already have their guard down, even if it may seem up, they've already let you in the door a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's our job as educators and teachers within the coaching profession to then say, okay, how do I help continue to open that door so that it's not just me they give access to, it's other teachers, it's other administration, it's other, parents. Sometimes, as a coach, you can be almost the safest environment for them to talk to because you're almost like a neutral, like setting. You know what I mean? They're
Yep.
coming there to play. They might say something to you that's just casual because they're out there shooting and you're rebounding for them, or they're going through drills and you guys might be doing even a team building activity, and they kind of let their guard down because they're around their guys, and you've created a safe environment. I think it's it's a vulnerable setting, but it's at the same time, I think that there's already some kind of access built into there. And I think it's just part of our job is to help strengthen that so that they feel comfortable to continue to, let other people in, because I think that's part of growing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's really well put. And like you said, players will, even if they don't realize it, maybe let their guard down because they're in such a relaxed, comfortable environment. Like you said, the access you get to them is really unique. And I think that that's something as coaches we should all definitely keep in mind, is that the things that they might share, may talk about, or even casually let out when they're, you know, on the court or in practice, or things that they may not share or feel comfortable sharing in any other environment. So no, I'm glad that you mentioned that. Now, as we talk about the removal of barriers for student athletes, let me just kind of ask you like straight up here, what barriers do you currently see or have you seen in previous positions that do currently exist for student athletes?
Yeah, I think that the barriers that I kind of see and there's multiple tiers to it, and I think there's levels, and it really depends on where you're located. But the ones I consistently see are access to a gym or court, transportation. I think volunteers, and what I mean by volunteers is more of that kind of goes hand in hand with the access to the gym or even the transportation. Is somebody being there to either help you get there or open a gym. Like who's the adult that's going to be there besides
Mhm.
just are there other people involved? I think finances can come into play, especially when we're talking about extra opportunities to play, which would be anything outside of, the high school or middle school season, which we now see as prevalent with travel ball. And then I think communication can be a barrier, especially within programs. And then I also think just knowledge and opportunities. And we can go farther into that one, but
Hmm.
the knowledge and opportunities that I'm talking about are just not really understanding, what travel ball is, or where can I go to play? Or, I mean, I think they seem simple to us as coaches because we've either been through them or like, well, how did you not know there was open gym? I communicated that to you, but we're not factoring in all the other things that goes through that kid's life.
You're
I mean,
right.
maybe surfing, or maybe they have a harder home life on some level. So like, that's not their top priority. They might have missed that text message, or they might be thinking about three other things. So like, how do we help, bring that back to the forefront of these, not, what knowledge they need to know, and what opportunities are there, and how do we make it easy for them to know that they're there. And the only other one that I had thought of that's kind of unique, on some level, but it's really it's kind of the awareness of the players. And what I mean by that is, I was at Veritas Christian Academy, and the players, the community really didn't know much about the school. It
Huh.
had
Okay.
been there for close to 15 years and had really strong program at one point, but people didn't know about it. Everybody from the media, and that's newspaper, so print media, to WLOS, which is the TV station around here, and those things. It just kind of interesting because it's still a barrier, right? Like those kids aren't getting the same access that other kids were getting in terms of coverage. And it ended up, impacting a couple of my kids, and I can go into that later, but just really interesting. That was one that I had kind of thought of. It's a little different, but I think that is something that kids face and programs face.
So we've brought up a lot, and I agree. Everything from, like you said, access to the gym, to transportation, accessibility, all the knowledge and opportunities. There's definitely a lot that's currently out there and has been out there in the past, is out there now, and will currently be out there in the future. So as we start to think of some of these issues that you brought up, what in what ways have you and your staff kind of worked to brainstorm possible solutions and try to work towards the removal of any of those barriers, if you want to speak to any of them in particular that you have some experience with?
Yeah, and I think the one, the access to like a gym, I think is probably, the number one that we can almost control the most. And sometimes it's not preferable for coaches, but I tried to open the gym once basketball ended. Instead of having individual workouts, I tried to really just have open gym, because a lot of my kids weren't going to have the ability to then go play travel ball, but I wanted to make the games competitive on some level. And so I tried to have it 2 to 3 times a week. We ended up sticking with 2 times a week, but I would change the schedule, or sometimes we go 6 to 9 o'clock at night, or I'd go 8 to 10. I mean, whatever I had to do to have access to the gym, we were going to provide that for the kids. And I even invited other kids in the area, because our program wasn't the biggest. We're like equivalent to what would be like a 1A, so a small classification. There's only 60 kids in the entire high school.
Oh, wow. Okay.
400 kids in the entire school. So it goes all the way down to pre-K. The elementary school is the largest, but kids kind of get funnel out there because of the limited opportunities for athletics in high school, which is something we started to change, and I kind of laid the foundation for with the basketball program, and it's in good hands, I think, moving forward. But we wanted to have opportunities for kids, because I started talking to some people, and they're like, hey, the other kids at other schools didn't have places to play. And
Oh,
I was
wow.
always, I'm just one of those people, like, I want kids to come play. I want you to have an opportunity to play with your friends, because they had friends at other schools, and we were a private school, but they had friends at public schools that wanted to play. And so I started opening it up to a wider range. And I mean, there was one night we had close to 40 kids. Now, obviously I had to think of really creative ways for us to play, because it was too many. And then I had to talk to people about, hey, we've got to keep a manageable number, and maybe we can invite some kids on Monday night and then some on Thursday night. And we tried to work around that. But as a staff, we really just tried to open up opportunities for kids to get in the gym and play, and providing a long enough time frame for them to then access it, because sometimes kids couldn't get there at 6. And they'd be like, well, if I can't get there till 7, should I still come? I'm like, you should always still come, as long as it's, feasible for you. But I tried to keep the gym open a little bit longer. So that was one way we tried to handle it. We tried to offer some, just if I knew enough kids wanted to go shoot, we'd say, okay, on Sunday afternoon, we're going to open up the gym. And then we try to send out some messages to any kid who wanted to come. And that's not always, I know it's one of the hard parts is not all school districts allow access to the gym at all times. And I think that's one of the barriers that we all kind of face. But I think as we continue to kind of grow as a profession, I think one of my goals is to really talk to other school districts and really work on having that availability and access. And maybe we rotate between public school gyms so that we're bringing kids from our school to other schools. And I started to see some of that in our area towards the end of the summer. One of the public schools started to call around and say, hey, we're going to have open gym from 3 to 5. Do you have some players who want to come? And they started opening it up to more than just their players. But that was exciting to see. I just, I'm one of those people, I just want kids to be able to get in and play. They don't necessarily have had to have played on the basketball team. That was like the beauty of what I was seeing, were kids that hadn't made the team, or even at other schools that hadn't made teams, but maybe we're going to try out the next year. They were coming to play, and that was exciting to see. And we also got some college kids and junior college kids who were back in the area who didn't really have access to play anywhere. They were coming to play as well. And so that was just good. Transportation, I think, is the hardest out of all of them.
I got some experience with that. Yeah, it is tricky, but go ahead.
It's tricky. I mean, so, at the school I was at, as long as we had the permission of the parents, we were allowed to pick up kids. And so I went around and picked up kids where I could. I had other kids, try to set up rides. Now, in the public schools in North Carolina, you're not allowed to give kids rides within district. Obviously, there are multiple reasons why that's built into place. And I completely understand why those are safeguards for kids. But I think we try to build them at times where they either could get a ride or we knew someone else could give them a ride. And I tried to always take that into account. So I tried to ask each player what times work for them and their families. And then I tried to pick the best time we could based on that. Not the best time for me, what was the best time for them. And then I worked within the schedule that the school had to make those things available. And it didn't always work perfectly, but I tried to frame it from their perspective, not from mine. And I think oftentimes we as coaches think, okay, well, I'm kind of doing this to volunteer, or, we obviously get paid, but it's basically like volunteering. And those things, I think sometimes we take for granted that we're not factoring in the players. We're just saying, okay, what's best for me, or what's best for the schedule. Sometimes it might be best for the players to go at 6 a.m. on a Saturday. And even though that's not what I want to do, I think as coaches, we need to say, okay, but what's best for the player? We're here for them, not for us. I think we should at least be. And sometimes we kind of have to work around that schedule, I think, to give them more opportunities.
A lot of what I get the sense of is that as a coach, it seems like one of the biggest things that we can do to remove barriers is we as coaches need to be like really flexible and have to be very accommodating to the needs of our students and what they need. That sounds like kind of a driving force in a couple of the responses that you gave them. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, I think you're right, Coach Hernandez. I think that's the right way to think about it. I think if we're, I say student athlete centered, but if we're thinking about them as student athletes, how do we make it work for them and take less of the focus off of us and more onto them? And then how do we cater to them on all of these things? And, for finances, some things I thought about were like tournaments or camps. Like, how do we make the most affordable camp? Because, a lot of times when we go to summer camps, I don't know how it is for you guys, but, we have to offer it to everyone. So whoever pays to go can go. It's not really a limited number. Obviously, there was 100 kids, that would be different. But, sometimes you're taking 15 kids to a camp and that 6 or 7 of them aren't going to be on the team, and somewhere in football or whatever. But so you need them for numbers sometimes, but it's kind of it works a little bit differently down here in North Carolina. You can't really have closed opportunities.
Okay.
So it's a little different, but I think just kind of keeping those things, aware of, okay, well, if the tournament or let's say the team camp is affordable, then everyone can kind of go, or do we have enough quote unquote like scholarship money to cover it, or do we have enough in our budget to just cover it for everyone so that they're not having to pay to go. But yeah, I think those, and that knowledge piece that I talked about, I think that's something every coach can provide without really having to do much, is really taking some time out of the season, either beforehand or after, or even during it, and helping kids understand what each one of the college levels really is. And whether they're going to go play or not, I think that awareness can help bring some reality to how hard it is to play at the next level. Letting them know what a junior college is, letting them know what NAI is, what Division III means, and that, there are a lot of opportunities to play college basketball, but you might be paying to play, so to speak, because you do have loans. It's not a free ride. Everybody's not getting a scholarship, but and that really what those can entail and what the colleges are like, and sometimes how isolated they are. You know what I mean? You might be able to go play D3, but you might be out in the middle of West Virginia, in the middle of nowhere, or something like
culture
that.
shock.
Yeah. It's a big difference from what you're used to if you're from a big city, right?
Yeah.
So I think those are things we can offer as coaches that really doesn't take much money, a little bit of time, but there's some really good resources out there. I think that break down the different college levels, but most of us kind of have an idea of that, but we don't really talk about that with players. I mean, think about it as a coach. I've been around a lot of coaches, but most of the ones that I was around, they only talked about that with the players who they thought had a ton of talent. Well, I think that it's kind of a disservice to the other kids because they really don't understand why they can't play. Besides talent, they all think, you know this from coaching. I mean, a lot of kids think they're on a different level than they are, even if you've tried to rationalize with them where they're, what role they play on the team.
It's kind of like giving them that access to information, or that lack of access to information could definitely be a barrier that students face, is just they don't know what they don't know, right?
Sure. Yeah. And I think we make assumptions that they just know. Like, oh, you know that you can't play at Duke. Well, there are kids all the time that say that they want to play there. And, I think that and whether we think that that's just that one kid. I mean, there's in the back of all those kids' minds, they all think they should start. I mean, even if, and a really good team might understand their role, but that doesn't mean that the kids who have bought into their role still don't think that I should start or that I can play college basketball. But once they have an understanding of the different levels, it might give them a better perspective of saying, okay, well, man, I'm not even starting here. Like maybe I can't play D1, but maybe I could try to play D3. You know what I mean? Like it might bring some rationalization into the picture, even though realistically, a lot of those kids won't go on to play, but it could start to help break down some of that, I think, limited knowledge or, just barrier to that. And what's going on. And I think knowing what's going on at the next level matters. I mean, I'm going to encourage my kids. And one of the things we're going to do this year, and I've talked to the head coach, and we're going to go to some games. There's a couple, and there's an NAI near us. There's a D3. There's 2 D3s actually, and there's a D1 that's in our town. And there's 2 that are close to us. And so, I mean, seeing some of those players and even watching some of the practices, I think is valuable for them to say, whoa, like this guy is 6'8" and just had like a 40-inch vertical and they're playing D1, but they're not even at a major D1.
Yeah.
And I think they see that on TV, but they don't fully grasp what that's like.
Oh, it's nothing like in person when you actually see it up front.
Yeah. So, and I think that just kind of breaks down that barrier of playing at the next level. And I think it helps a coach too, because it helps bring some rationalization of, okay, like let's be the best high school player we can be. And then we can focus on opportunities beyond that if we have players who meet those qualifications.
Yeah. No, but that's a really good point though. The like we just talked about, just a barrier. I mean, that barrier could be that you as a coach and the player are just not even on the same wavelength in terms of what you're communicating about, because the way that your player sees themselves or the way that they envision things going may be completely separate from like what you as a coach see. And if you never have that conversation or ever hash that out, you're never going to be on the same wavelength, and there's always going to be that wall, whether you realize it or not, in between the both of you.
Yeah, and I think, you just, when you said something in there about communication, it made me also think about how many times we say, I mean, it could be a simple term as like up the line. And if you've never really been talking about that, or you're used to it, but all of a sudden you guys have changed your defensive philosophy, and then the kids aren't used to that lingo or those phrases, I think that's one of those barriers within your own program, right? The communication piece of having a common set of knowledge and tools within your own program about your offense and defense they can understand. Because I often just think, oh, kids will get it. They'll just pick up on, but how many kids just kind of fake it till they make it, right? They're like, oh yeah, well, I didn't really know what you were talking about, coach, but I just kind of kept trying. And then you were like, yeah, that's right. And you're like, oh, great. Like, you know what I mean? Like they're just trying. I think we often assume they know more than they do, because we have such a higher knowledge base. We're just like, oh, they know that should be a right-handed flick pass on the right side. Well, they might not know that.
Yeah,
So
exactly. The knowledge that you have as a coach is going to be a lot different than what your players are going to come in with.
yeah, and that's, I just think those are all things that we can kind of work on as coaches, that I think a lot of us do work on them. But I think if we're more aware, especially of the players on the team that it could impact the most, like, we often are like, oh, well, that kid's, they're the team captain, they're at every practice. Well, there's probably a reason they're at every practice. They always have a ride. Like the kid who misses practice sometimes but has a rough home life, like that's our job as a coach to help them figure that out. I don't think that's on a 15-year-old kid or a 16-year-old kid that they should have to figure that out on their own. Well, you just got to be there. That's not fair to that kid.
Like,
Like,
what are they going to do with that information? Like, okay, I just have to be here. Like,
yeah, we have sometime, and I've heard coaches or seen coaches that kind of have those hard and fast rules about, you've got to be at practice at this time, or you've got to do this. Well, if they've had habits that haven't been conducive to being, on time, then what are we doing to teach them how to be on time, not just demanding it of them? So
yeah, I mean, as I was thinking about, one of the questions I was going to ask is about, being proactive in removing a lot of these barriers. And it really feels like one of the best ways for coaches to be proactive in removing barriers is you really just have to know what your players are, and you have to know who they are, what their experiences are, what their situations are in. Because if you're proactive and you get to know your players, at least that gives you the insight as to what those barriers are, rather than maybe like having like hard and fast rules when you come in and then like not being able to budge or negotiate on them all. It sounds like one of the easiest ways to be proactive in the removal of these barriers is just getting to know your players and knowing what those are in the first place and finding a way to work through them.
yeah, it feeds back into that relationship piece. And I think an easy thing that, I do this in my classrooms, like when we start up, and I teach business classes. So like digital design is one of my classes, and marketing, and I'll have the kids all fill out like a questionnaire, and I just want to know about them. I want to know what movies they like, what books they like, what do they like to do for fun. And those are easy things for players to do too. And then, once they're in your program, you get to know them. But when they're new to the varsity program or they're new to the JV program, you really kind of want to know, about that player. And as you start to ask those questions, and then you find those commonalities, let's say that you can't get through to a player. So you're just like, man, I'm asking him to give this extra level of leadership, but I'm not seeing that. Well, you know that his favorite athlete is LeBron. Let's just say you can go find everything you know about LeBron James where he talks about leadership, and leaving that kid some notes that LeBron says, not about what you want, but what about LeBron says, because that maybe can relate to him a little bit more than Coach Young saying something to him. Or even if I brought up an example of saying something about, a player that I liked back in the day. So like, if I was like, well, Richard Hamilton was an unbelievable player at UConn because he did this, like, they don't know who Richard Hamilton is. And I'm bringing up someone who they can't relate to. But if I bring up Klay Thompson or Kyrie Irving, and I bring out the best attributes of wherever that player is, maybe that brings home a little bit more to them because they can relate to it.
Yeah. Something pretty simple, right?
Yeah. And I think I know we have a lot on our plates as coaches. And so I don't want to belittle that either, because I know we have so much, but I think if you really try to go in every day saying, okay, how do I get better and I like to think of coaching is teaching. And I think if you don't look at coaching as teaching, then I think you're missing part of the value of what you're capable of doing, because I think as a teacher, you are trying to show that person how they can improve in certain areas. And as we get to know them as people, it allows us to more easily do that. And I think that's just, I think it's vital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100% agree with that. No, that's really well put. Are there things that you think we as coaches potentially do that maybe accidentally put up barriers for players? Are there things that we might do, whether we realize it or not, that may actually be making the experience for our players more difficult than it needs to be?
Yeah, I think a lot of coaches, we may have an idea of what the system needs to be, or we've built this culture, and our culture relies on these 4 pillars. And we almost just expect that kid to fit in there. And we may push out a kid who really could have fit into all that, but it is almost intimidating because they don't understand all of those things. And I think even, I even think there's a better way to do tryouts. I think that sometimes, we're taking a snapshot picture of who that kid is. And let's say we have 2 days, and I know we may have a lot of players at some schools because the schools are larger, but there's got to be a better way to understand who that person is. Because I'll tell you, there are some of the kids that I've had that have been through the hardest life situations where they have so much more grit and determination. And that player in the end worked harder, played harder. And that's not always the case, but I think sometimes we cut those people short because we're like, there's just so many things that like their attitude or whatever it may be. And I think sometimes we just let that kid go to the side because we're like, it's going to hurt our culture. Well, why isn't our culture strong enough to help that kid change? Change for the better. And I think we often think we have to protect ourselves. We're like, I got to protect this culture. I've got to protect the other kids. Well, the other kids should want to also help that kid. And I think sometimes we just often give up on kids. And that's, to me, that's personal, just because as a teacher, I think we do the same thing. We might focus on the top 75% of the class because they're paying attention. Well, why aren't the other 25% paying attention? There's a reason for that.
Yeah.
So I just think those are things where we've set up this idea that, well, I'm going to coach the kids who want to be here. Well, they all want to be there. They all showed up. And I think we just say that kid just doesn't get it. Like, I don't understand. Like, I've told him 100 times. Well, if you've told him 100 times, you're not telling, you find a different way to tell him, or find a different way to tell her. Like, you're saying the same thing over and over. Well, they're not getting it. So as a teacher, why would I keep telling a kid the same method over and over? There's got to be a different method, or there's got to be a different way to help them learn. And those are the barriers that we get stuck saying. It just it's almost like the kid has a problem and that we don't, if that makes sense. Like, we almost put it off, and we're all guilty of it at times. But I think that's one of the biggest barriers, is that we we make it, so to speak, like it's got to be this. It's like kind of our way, and it's not our way or the highway, so to speak. But in essence, it ends up being that way, because the kids who you don't think fit your program, I mean, they ended up not being in it.
Well, it's a really interesting thing, I think, to reflect on, is the fact that, as you mentioned, we get concerned or worried about how do you like protecting our program from, certain things or certain individuals. But I think it's a really good point to think about. It's like, why isn't our culture, why isn't our program strong enough to handle a kid who might need more like love and attention, right? Like that's a really just interesting thought. Like, how delicate do we think our program is that we're not able to like take on this kid who has great potential just because they might be a little rough around the edges?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it should challenge you as an educator to say, man, like, okay, so what can I do? And sure, there are going to be circumstances where like it is difficult, it causes problems, sure. But I think if you've built the right culture and you have the right team, you will see changes in that kid. And I think later on in life, you will see that you hanging on to that kid and you working with that kid and your team working with that kid and the other players, that hopefully it's made a positive impact later on in life. And I think too often we're just quick to try and protect ourselves. And we're high school coaches in the end, and I know I love coaching. I would like to win a state championship one day. I mean, those are important. I wanted one as a player, and we were very good. But those things, I realized that like where the kids end up going after high school is more important to me than winning. I mean, of course I want to win. I'm a competitor, but I care about them as people. And I think our culture within the locker room has to be so strong that one kid, no matter what he's doing, shouldn't be able to wreck the team culture. And if he does, then I don't think we had a very good culture to start with.
It's kind of a paper thin culture to begin with, right?
Yeah. Maybe I'm not, instilling the right values as a coach, and maybe even I've got those paper thin, value where, they're just kind of, if I'm not, it's kind of like if I tell my kids like, hey, I want you to be in the best shape possible, and I'm not in the best shape physically, and I'm not saying that you have to be, but like if I'm not, I'm blanking on the phrase I'm looking for, but if I'm not modeling the way, then I think it's hard to instill that in your culture, right? If I'm saying, hey, like we want to be polite and respectful, but then in practice I use cuss words. I mean, I think think you're kind of yourself, right? And I think it changes the way you're called. You can write words up on the wall, you can talk about them in practice, but unless you truly believe them, kids feel that. And if we say, hey, we're a team, we're a family, and we talk about family, and then we let one kid go, like families don't let people, or well, I mean,
I know what you mean.
Families shouldn't let people go, and obviously there are things that happen, but I just feel like it's something where like the family that I want to build as a team, we don't let people slip through the cracks. Because I know kids who slipped through the cracks when I was growing up, and after they didn't when I was there, but then when I graduated, a couple kids, and one had enormous potential to play in college.
Yeah.
And he fell through the cracks, and it made me mad at, us, the community. I mean, somebody could have stopped that. And I think that a team has the capability to do that. It's not all on us, but I just think that there are opportunities there to do that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to really think about something as kind of simple as like your team culture and the way that you present your culture, the way that you say your words, the way that you have like your mantra, you're saying how that could potentially become a barrier if it is not something that is followed through on, or if you as a coach are kind of hypocritical about it, like you create this barrier that you might not even be aware of, because a kid could be really confused as to why is, this X, Y, and Z part of this team's culture, but yet I see like A, B, and C in reality take place.
Yeah, I think you're right.
That's really, it's an interesting thing to kind of think about. And I think, as we talked about, it's a lot about knowing who our students are, right? Knowing who even our parents are as well. And that's something that I think sometimes we might think as coaches could be a potential barrier. If you had experience of like having to work with parents, if parents ever been anything that have been like a barrier to you that you've had to kind of work with or overcome, or maybe I know I've had experiences of parents who just aren't necessarily particularly like knowledgeable about certain things and they have to be kind of educated about basketball and coaching and all that. Has that experience of parents ever presented to be a barrier for you?
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen it on all sides where sometimes it's lack of knowledge, sometimes, and even knowledge within, anytime you have to make cuts, there are difficult decisions. And I always make those one-on-one in person
Yep.
with the kid. And then I also reach out to the families individually because I want them to understand why that happened and how I think they can improve. Because I think too often we don't continue that relationship. Well, what if that kid who's 5'8" all of a sudden next year is 6'3"?
And then you start giving them all the attention after that. Yeah.
And what are you really teaching them at that point? That you didn't care about them then, but now you do. I mean, that's also kind of shallow on our level. That I think that we want the best for the kid, and if that kid trying out for basketball, like I mentioned, he loves basketball or wants to love basketball, and we should do everything in our power to help kids want to play. And maybe they just end up playing rec league the rest of their life. But I mean, I still think that's important. And I think we have a responsibility to instill the game to anybody who wants to learn. At least I feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
With the parents, I think keeping statistics are really important. I think it's really come a long ways with Huddle and Synergy and some other things. Because we used to track on the JV level. I was fortunate. I had an amazing assistant coach who was a former college basketball coach and high school basketball coach, and his son was
nice.
Yeah, and he kept stats on an iPad, and it was just huge because we were able to record what kids were doing. And we had a couple of parents that complained at certain times, said, "Listen, they're playing more than you think." Like one of the kids was playing like 9 minutes a game, and they were like, "Oh, I didn't even realize they were playing that much." And they thought they'd never played. And they're like, "Well, here's what they do when they come in. Like they're, 3 turnovers, like 1 rebound, and they're shooting 10% from the floor." And this is JV level, but it's like, we're playing them a little bit more than we should, but we see the potential. And they're like, "Oh, well, that's good." It's like, but we want you to know, like, one of the reasons he can't gain more minutes is because every time he comes in, he's turning the ball over. So we're working on ball security. But having that data to then talk to the parent allowed us to break down that barrier of us versus them. It was more of, hey, here's what the numbers kind of say, and here's what we're looking at. We see that as coaches. We might see that he's turning it over. But, as a parent, you might gloss it over like, well, look, the other kids are turning it over too. It's not his fault. But the data more allows you to say, well, here's kind of the hard facts about it. And I think that can sometimes remove the hostility. And I think we just always have to go into every parent relationship knowing that they're the mama or papa bear. Like their kid matters the most to them at all times.
Yeah.
And you have to handle that relationship with grace and dignity, because like that, to them, that's everything. That kid is everything. No matter how they may treat their kid, even if you see that it may not be in the best relationship, that parent will still go to bat for that kid every day of the week, especially when they feel like that kid's been attacked on some. And to them, the fact might be they didn't play.
Right. Yeah. No, you bring up a really good point, and I know this is something that others have brought up before. We always have to remember that child is going to be that parent's most important person in their life. Like nothing it will matter more than that. We always have to remember that. Like it's not they're not a basketball player to that parent.
Yeah. And I think I try to always talk to all parents. I try to give, like, for instance, when I left Veritas, I called every parent first. Everybody that was a part of that was going to be a part of the varsity program this next year. And I talked to the parents first about how much it meant to me that I was able to coach their kid. And that I thank them for that. And I wanted them to know that the program would be in good hands. And I also wanted them to know that I called them because I respect them as parents, and I didn't want the kids to know before them, and for their kid to then come to them and be questioning what was happening or be confused or sad or maybe mad about it. I wanted the parents to have the upper hand. And I think sometimes we deliver messages through our players before we talk to the parents, and it should sometimes be the other way around so that the parents prepared to have that conversation. Because it can create almost a game of telephone where we tell the players to tell their parents that something's going to happen, whether it's a camp or something, and then all of a sudden everyone's all confused. You've got parents calling you, asking you why they're going there at this time, and they heard from someone else's parents it's something else. You know what I mean? It kind of
it gets messy.
builds a wild communication piece. And I think, the Remind app, there's a bunch of them, Team Reach, all of those apps I think are great tools to help communicate messages clearly to parents and players almost simultaneously, where you can kind of get your communication levels out to everybody to where it's just, hey, here's the message. We're going to have a team outing Friday at 6 p.m. and it's going to be at the bowling alley or whatever. But that way everybody knows what's happening and when.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that you want to have that direct line of communication. You don't want to be have people hear things secondhand, third hand, fourth hand, and no, oh boy, that can become a real mess real quick. Before we hit our concluding segment, I did want to give you the opportunity, Coach, if you had any particular success stories or things that you can share about what happened when those barriers were moved, if you have any of those that you have to share about with you and your program when you were able to remove those barriers for your players.
Yeah, so there was a kid in this past year at Veritas, and I mean, extremely talented, athletic, just high character. He was one of our team captains, and when I saw him play, and I knew he was one of the better teams in the conference once I saw a couple workouts, and I mean, he averaged 25 points a game, 6 rebounds, like 4 assists, 3 steals. I mean, he was a very good all around player, but nobody knew who he was. I mean, and I mean that from you could have talked to someone 3 schools over and they didn't know who he was, because the conference we played in is a Christian schools conference, and we played a lot of teams that were about an hour and a half away. So locally in the area, nobody really knew about us. And because of COVID, his junior year had really kind of been taken away. So, and that's obviously a vital year for recruitment and an ability to play. And he had the talent to play at the next level. So the ability to remove that barrier of, honestly, accessibility of who he is. I started working with the local newspaper they got 2 articles out this year. He was named to the second team All WNC, which is a pretty big honor. There's only 12 kids that are picked for that, or 10, sorry. and that's in our area of Western North Carolina, which is a pretty large area. And we also were on WLS a couple times, and I just tried to really build him up. And one of the college coaches that ended up recruiting him, it saw him in a newspaper article of all things. A lot of coaches that are read the newspaper or may pick up some of the, and he just happened to see it and was like, just reached out. I was like, hey, and I had already called this coach before, but you know how it is when you're calling coaches or emailing, it gets buried. And he's now playing in college, so he'll be in the NAI this year and got a pretty nice scholarship. And it was just one of those things where he wasn't even sure he could play college basketball, and his parents weren't sure. They're like, you think? And I was like, I know. I don't think, I know he can, but it's going to be about find a program to give him a chance, because the transfer portal had changed so much. Yeah. It was really about how do we get awareness of this kid in a short amount of time. Obviously, if you've got a long runway, or if the kid's 6'6", but this kid is, 6 foot, 6'1", and a guard. So there's plenty of
harder
those
to stand out.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. Keep going. I don't know if I missed you there. If I missed you
Oh,
there,
sorry.
Coach.
I missed that last part. I think I might have said something at the same time.
Oh no, I just said it was those 6'1" guards. It's a little harder for them to stand out.
It definitely is. Unless you can do something that's extraordinary. But the thing that I knew about this kid was that he would go in and strengthen anybody's culture. It didn't matter what their values were, that he's just an amazing person. And comes from a really good family, but he just kind of, I've been around a lot of really good kids, but he treated so many other kids with so much respect, and was always willing to work with kids, and didn't always know the right things to do in a drill because he was very raw himself, but was always willing to put himself out there and learn. And I think that was something I was able to talk about with. He ended up having a couple opportunities to play, and a D1 actually offered him a walk-on spot as well, and one of them offered him a manager spot, and that was even nice to know that they felt like he could be, part of the coaching staff on some level, which just meant a lot about him as a player and a person.
No, that's awesome, Coach. Appreciate you sharing that. That's one of those that makes it all worth it, I think, when you hear stories like that, and just to be able to speaks to what we just talked about, you provide the opportunities, and who knows who's going to be reading the newspaper, right? And
Yeah.
when you put them out there, that is so funny to think of something like that happening. That's great. To wrap up, Coach, there's a couple questions I ask every guest, so I'll go ahead and get started with this first one. Thinking back to your coaching career, or thinking back on your coaching career, rather, what is a moment from your coaching career that you think others listening would be able to learn from?
I think it's just believing in yourself and what you're teaching the kids. And I had my first year of coaching JVs. I think we were maybe 2-22. We got thumped every game. I mean, it was rough, but we were instilling a lot of core values, and really that was obviously laying the foundation for what we wanted our JV program to be. We don't have a freshman program, so it's freshman and sophomore, and we really worked on fundamentals. And the next year we ended up winning the conference, and we only lost 4 games. So we ended up going 20-4, and won the conference. And for those kids to see that change, and it's not like we didn't really change. It's not like we got some game changing freshmen in or anything like that. It just, the guys bought in, and we were 10 deep. And we actually had 15 kids on that team. And I mean, we played everybody in a lot of games. I mean, we had the second string and third string they would fight just as hard as the first string. And, they didn't see much let up in the games. And that was exciting to see everybody kind of in and want to be part of a program.
That's awesome. That's make me ready to jump out in the court right now and all right, let's get moving, let's get going. And that's awesome, Coach. That's great. To wrap up, I give every guest what I call 60-second soapbox, your platform to get out kind of a final thought, a closing message, a closing idea, just something that you want to leave the listeners with. I'll let you kind of take this in any direction that you want. So I'm just going to go ahead and give you the floor, Coach. I'm just going to let you take it from here.
Yeah, I would love to see more middle school development leagues. And I think that's kind of unique, but I really think there needs to be more of a B team type league in middle schools, because we have so many kids trying out and so few spaces. And so instead of keeping 12 or 15, you've got a whole second team maybe on some level that can play other schools. I'd like to see a second level of players that are able to develop, so that when they come into high school, there's more opportunities for them, and more opportunities for the coaches to see more players that have kind of built in this work ethic and development, because you never know where a 6th grade kid who's 5 feet tall might be when they're in 9th grade. And I think a middle school development league is something I'm working on locally, and at the new school I'm going to. And it does take kids, but I think there's always an opportunity, if you make it fun, to get players out there and really grow and develop kids at a young age that can then impact a high school level.
Well, as somebody who coached middle school for quite a few years, I will co-sign that. I think that any opportunity to get the middle schoolers out there in a more organized fashion, because like you said, that you never know, especially in middle school, where kids' development is going to take them, or sometimes you might have that, 6 foot player, and then they stop growing after they're 13, and they got to, learn how to be a guard and everything like that.
Yeah.
So, no, that's awesome. I co-sign that wholeheartedly. And special shout out to all of you who coach a middle school program, because I know that is a unique challenge into itself. So, Coach Young, I want to thank you for spending some time talking about removing barriers for student athletes, talking about your coaching journey, your coaching philosophies, sharing the stories that you did. Really, really appreciate it. And best of luck as you start your new journey, your new chapter. And hopefully you are able to just as successfully continue to remove those barriers and continue to have success along your coaching journey. So Coach Young, thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate it, Coach Hernandez. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast, and we will see you guys next.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.